Hello, everybody. So yeah, again, my name is Greg McConnell. I'm a solutions architect with AWS in the security team. And I am going to be talking about GuardDuty. We're going to do a little live role-playing session. I'll be showing a demo also. I'm going to actually, as I start, kick off a demo because it can take about 15 minutes for this to all get started. So by the time we're done with the live action role-playing, hopefully this will all be done. Who here has used GuardDuty in any capacity? 2, 3, 4. A lot of people doing this, not raising their hand. So it's interesting. Okay, and who's done it in production? Okay, 2 in production. Who's heard of GuardDuty? Okay, that's a good start. And just so I can understand the makeup of the group, who's running AWS in production at their work? Okay, great. All right, sorry, just give me a second. Let me see the score. GuardDuty is not enabled. Let me just prove that to you. It's not a trick. Well, it's not enabled. We're in Ohio, the Ohio region. And I'll provide most of these slides afterwards, so you don't have to take pictures. If you want to, it's fine. But I'll provide the slides later for anyone who's interested. All right, this is going to kick off, and it's going to create a very small, mostly harmless attack in my account. All right, on to the presentation. All right, who here has been a little freaked out about the cryptocurrency decline over the last month?
I saw it.
Who here could care less? Who here would be worried if in their production environment they detected cryptocurrency mining activity? Is anyone here able to detect that now in their environment? What if I told you we had a solution? This is going to be a sales thing. All right, during the, was I blocking that the whole time? During the preview of GuardDuty back in the fall, I spoke to a customer, pretty big customer, who had started using it. And they turned it on in a couple of their accounts, and they had it on for a few days, and we got on the phone because they had some questions. And I said that in the console, in the GuardDuty console, there was nothing being displayed. There were no findings. That's where all of the findings would show up if you had an attack or some kind of threat was detected. They said, are you sure that it's turned on? Are you sure that on the back end you guys have whitelisted our account properly? Are you sure this is all working? And I explained, yes, it was. If there's no findings, that means there's no problems. So you could turn this on and for a week not have any findings. That's really a good thing. Don't worry about that. But there are ways to generate findings to prove it to yourself that it is actually on and running, and I can show those to you in a minute. I talked to another customer during a loft lab I did in San Francisco in December. And in the lab, it does a lot of the same attacks I'm going to show you here. But on this customer's account, because they ran it in their work account, this was a lab where we couldn't give them quick labs where they could use an account that's not theirs. They actually had to use their work account. He had 3 instances of machines communicating out with command and control servers, indicating that these were possibly part of some sort of bot farm. And he asked if this was part of the lab, and I explained, no, this is definitely not part of the lab. This is most likely an actual problem in your account. This is pointing to a real problem. And he had turned it on just 15 minutes earlier. So very rapidly these showed up. And so we looked at one of the instances that was marked as making these calls out, and it had been terminated. The other 2, we didn't get a chance to look at because he wanted to leave and talk to his security managers, because that was a pretty big deal. And he just found that just by turning it on during the lab, just casually as part of a lesson. So that was interesting. All right, so what we're going to do, and I'm honestly not trying to insult anyone's intelligence here. This is just kind of a somewhat interesting, fun way of presenting the basic concepts of GuardDuty. So I need 3 volunteers. I don't have a lot to give out. I do have some stickers. Stickers are actually really popular at AWS, but I found that in general customers find them less interesting. But I do have some Chaos Monkey, Simian Army. I've got 1 GuardDuty sticker.
Can we see the stickers?
So this is the GuardDuty sticker. This is a new one, AWS Gaming. Not very exciting. And then you guys know the Simian Army, Netflix's open source tools. This is actually a really good sticker. You don't see this anymore. And then there's the Chaos Monkey. Yeah, actually it is. Identity and access management, very exciting. I'm sure everybody here. This is new, AWS Elemental Media Converter. Anyway, there's a few. I just need 3 volunteers. And you won't have to do anything but literally just stand up here. You. Perfect. Can you guys still hear me?
Stickers.
Good. All right. If the 3 of you could just stand right here in the row. Yeah, facing this way. This is going to be for your neck. Yours. This is for yours. Yes, you may. All right. Can everyone in the back see these somewhat? I'll read them to you. But how is it? Somewhat visible? I see some nodding. All right, so GuardDuty is mainly focused on 2 threat targets. I don't know if you guys are familiar with our icons, but this is EC2 and IAM. Those are the 2 services that GuardDuty focuses on right now. And over time, we'll expand that to other services, but that's what it covers right now. And it's mainly about takeovers, someone getting control of an EC2 instance, and also credentials being stolen and used. These 2 are the main thing. So how does it work? So, sorry, just grab this. It looks at 3 logs. VPC flow logs. If you want to hold those up and just kind of flip them. VPC flow logs. CloudTrail logs. Yeah, I think that's going to, there you go. And DNS logs. Does anyone know what VPC flow logs are? Can someone tell me?
Packets from a VPC?
Yeah, so it's like NetFlow, Cisco NetFlow. It's basically the traffic flow within a VPC. It's not going to give you like the layer 7 information, but it does give you the flow of the traffic. You got to turn it on within a VPC. It used to be more expensive than it is now. We recently reduced the cost of CloudTrail logs, which was the primary expense of VPC flow logs, so that's helped. But it's still a relatively expensive thing to turn on, especially if you have a lot of VPCs and a lot of instances. The next is CloudTrail. Anybody know what that is? It's an easy one. Yes, gentlemen, right here.
Me?
Yes.
It is a logging service for API activity.
Yes.
Good job.
You can kind of think of it as an audit service. It has security purposes, but also from an infrastructure troubleshooting standpoint, it's an important service. DNS logs is relatively new. Within a VPC, within a subnet of a VPC, you have a default DNS address you can point to and do queries of. The logs of all those queries goes into this DNS log system. This isn't something that you have access to, at least at the moment, but GuardDuty does. Now here's the interesting thing. There's a lot of logs there, especially if you have, say 100 VPCs in a particular region. That would be a lot of VPC flow logs to turn on. GuardDuty doesn't require you to turn on any of these. You should have CloudTrail logs on anyway, but you don't have to turn on VPC flow logs. It actually gets access to this information before it's delivered to the customer. And what happens is it's held in memory by GuardDuty, then the analysis occurs, and then that information is discarded. So one of the interesting things about GuardDuty is you turn it on, and it immediately has access to all of these log files, regardless of how many VPCs, how many IAM users, how many calls are coming in, and there's no impact to your account by turning them on. So regardless of the scale you're running at, you turn it on, it immediately starts viewing those logs, and it can immediately start returning findings. Now there's some findings that require a baseline get established, like for example, there's a finding that if it detects that the volume of traffic going out of an instance increases dramatically, it will report on that. But to do that, it needs to get a baseline. And some baselines take between 7 and 14 days to do. But other things like a SSH brute force attack, that would be immediately picked up by GuardDuty. Okay? So, flow logs, CloudTrail, ENS logs. Then we go to GuardDuty. And again, like I said, it's pulling those logs from the back end, it's analyzing them in memory, finding problems, anomalies, threats, things like that. It does this a number of ways. It does some machine learning for a few of the findings. A good example is DNS being used for data exfiltration. So this is a pretty unusual finding, and it's somewhat difficult to do based on just the VPC flow logs. But we have machine learning set up that can detect that when it sees it in the VPC flow log traffic. It also uses some threat lists. So we have threat lists from crowdsource and Proofpoint. You can add your own custom threat list. It could be as simple as just a list of IP addresses that you upload to S3 and point to. We support a number of threat list formats, but you can do your own custom threat list. And we also have the kind of AWS curated threat list that we've built over time and are always kind of modifying and editing. And it gets access to that too. I mentioned there's a lot of analysis done based on baselines that it looks at. And a few other things that are kind of in the mix. But it looks at a number of different things to kind of find problems that it detects the threat. So GuardDuty does its analysis, it finds a problem, and it then delivers findings. Any idea where those findings might be?
Oh, dashboards. Dashboard for everything.
Yeah, so the console, for one, you know, every service has a console, and within there is the ability to view the findings. Where else do you think findings may be delivered? What's a service?
CloudWatch events.
Yes. Wow. Amazing. You know what? Would you like a sticker? That amazing answer? Preference? Here. Take a look. Go, just take one, please. All right. Yeah. So CloudWatch events. How do we deal with insider threats? Yeah, there are a few findings that are around the compromise of an instance, and I would say that can be an insider threat. Oftentimes it is. Also, the compromise of IAM credentials could also be an insider threat, and it looks at that. So, you know, I don't know if we really would differentiate whether it's an external or insider threat attack. We look at both from the standpoint of EC2 and IAM. But it's an interesting question to think about on the findings themselves, whether, you know, some are more focused on insider versus external threats. So, yes?
When you use the term AI, you mean statistical regression model, right?
Machine learning. I don't know if I can go beyond that. We're a little bit, we don't say a lot about some of the models we're using, for good reason. You know, we don't say like about thresholds of what we look at for say as a brute force. But you know, we don't give a lot of details around the machine learning. We may at some point. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. So if there's other questions you guys have as we're going through the scenario, let me know. Sorry, I can't really answer that.
Okay, you said that 4 times.
Sorry. Fine. So the console and CloudWatch events. CloudWatch events is a great source because it gets access to a lot of API calls immediately when they're made. And then, does anyone know what you can do with CloudWatch events once it's in there?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. You can create rules which trigger Lambda functions, SNS, whatever. All right, we're going to go through an example of this. We have SSH brute force attack, which is one of the findings we look for. Where do you think that's going to show up?
Mostly here.
Mostly there, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a few places, but mostly VPC flow log entries. Okay? What's the next step? It's falling apart. GuardDuty analysis. So again, pulling the VPC flow logs into memory, analyzing them, finding the problems. That leads to GuardDuty findings. And that goes to, in this example, a CloudWatch event rule. And what can we do with the CloudWatch event rule that might be interesting in the case of an SSH brute force attack?
Block IPs.
Yeah, you could run a Lambda function. You could block that particular IP address. You could block that particular IP address, or more likely, just stop allowing SSH from the internet, which you shouldn't be doing in the first place. There's a lot of things you can do here, and really it all just comes down to Lambda. Not all of our customers are going to do everything in CloudWatch events in Lambda. A lot of them use CloudWatch events to send it to their SIM and then take action there. So that's kind of the recommended pattern, is to have CloudWatch events, oftentimes use SNS or other mechanisms depending on the solution you're using, to funnel all that into your SIM and then use the normal procedures you have of alerting security team, doing analysis, things like that. Any questions for the 3 levels of the GuardDuty system for this? Yes?
So I just want to clarify, do I need to have VPC flow logs turned on to get the benefit that comes from the VPC
You do not.
flow logs?
There's no benefit from a GuardDuty standpoint to turning it on. But you may want to do your own analysis. Usually what I see is a customer has a specific question or has seen a recent attack, and then they'll turn flow logs on. You don't see flow logs often turned on all the time. But you can turn it on to do your own analysis. And same for CloudTrail, but you should definitely have CloudTrail turned on.
And then the cost is based on the number of logs processed. Is there a way to figure out
Yes.
relative?
I will have that answer for you. That's a good answer. Yes?
So, does this get enabled on the account level or on the organization level?
It gets enabled on the account level in a region. We do have a thing, and I'll get this later, but I'll just talk about it now. We have an idea of the master-member account relationship. So you can have a number of member accounts linked to a master account, and all the CloudWatch events flow up to the master account, and all of the findings that you see in the console also float up. Right now, the limit's 1,000 member accounts. Is anyone familiar with organizations? So it's not tied to organizations. It will be in the future. So you could have a organization's master account, which is different from your GuardDuty master account. But eventually it'll all be tied together. Yes?
Is it supported, what is the management of GuardDuty supported by information?
Yes, not everything right now. Most of what you could do is supported. I think the master member account relationship setup and everything is not, mainly because, like a lot of things where it's you're setting up a relationship between accounts, you have to send an invitation, and the invitation has to be accepted. But you can script that using the CLI or API, as long as you have the rights in the master member account, and push all that stuff very quickly. And that's what we've had customers do. They've onboarded hundreds of accounts in over a weekend, just by scripting. Yes?
Is there any plan to kind of collapse the functionality of GuardDuty with Macy? Because there seems to be some kind of overlap, especially with IAM, but
Yeah.
also they're separate services.
Right. So Macy is mainly focused on data. It looks at your S3 buckets. It does data classification. It looks for anomalies around access to that data. It looks for open buckets. And over time, Macy will be expanded to other data sources. But Macy also looks at CloudTrail and also reports on some of the findings that GuardDuty does. So from a CloudTrail standpoint and looking at actions around IAM, there is a little bit of overlap. But where Macy is data, GuardDuty is really about threats to EC2 and IAM. You know, IAM credential exfiltration and theft and things like that, Macy's not super great at picking that up. It picks up some of it, but not a lot. GuardDuty does a better job at that. And then Macy has no visibility into how your EC2 instances are working. Right? Yeah. And then, so a little bit of overlap, but really separate realms for the most part. And then the third service in this kind of triad of services, which will be expanded, is Inspector. And that's looking directly at the EC2 instance. you're installing an agent, you're comparing the configuration against various standards, whereas GuardDuty and Macy have no access into the EC2 instance. And you'll see these services kind of expanded over time. Yes?
Can you elaborate on the fact that VPC flow logs, DNS logs, CloudTrail not being enabled, but yet you're capturing that data?
Yes. I know it's kind of counterintuitive, and it's also hard to believe, and I think that's why I like to go through this just so it's...
Are you expecting a sticker for that?
No sticker. I'll never turn a sticker down, but yeah.
So, yes, we, on the back end, have access to all that data.
Yeah.
We've always had access to all that data. This is before it's curated for the customer, before it's delivered to the customer. We need it for our own analysis, for our own protection. GuardDuty, the service, gets access to it on the back end, and then does its analysis. It doesn't look at, even if you had VPC flow logs turned on in your account, it's not even looking at that. It's looking at the back ends, which is an uncurated view of it.
Kind of the original source, or
Yeah, and it's a view that's much easier for them to analyze because it doesn't get a lot of the metadata that's added when it's thrown into your account. So they can do it much quicker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Since you have access on the back end, then it would be harder for the back end actually to get those logs and hide them.
It'd be impossible.
Yeah.
Okay. It'd be very difficult. I'll say that.
And you probably have bigger problems.
Yeah. We'd have bigger problems. Was there a question? Yes.
So what else would you be able to disable except for VPC? Is that the only
Like which of
thing?
these logs can you disable?
Yeah, I mean, is that,
I've got that question a lot. So you don't have the ability to granularly turn off these individual logs. We either analyze all of those logs or we don't.
I mean, for my account.
Oh, so you turn on GuardDuty in one account in one region, and all those logs are going to be analyzed.
Oh, so then, I guess I'm not sure, because when I tried to turn on VPC load, my naked.
Right.
So like, I don't want to duplicate anything. I just,
Sure, yeah, so you don't need to turn on VPC flow logs. We analyze it ourselves on the back end. Now you can, if you want to kind of double check things or do your own analysis, but you don't have to. Yes?
If the payload is too big, like the data is too big for your security training, you guys just ignore it?
No. So we'll batch it if we need to. I've never heard of a problem like that in the way we're pulling the data. Because most of these data files are in set sizes anyways that it's receiving, so I don't think that would ever be an issue. Yeah, we wouldn't discard data just because. But we would have mechanisms to make sure it's the right size so it can be analyzed in memory.
So if it's not the right size, you guys like
We must, yeah. But my understanding is it's sent in a particular size each time. And so we give a certain amount of data in each frame that's sent to GuardDuty that can fit in memory for the analysis. Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
So since we can't see those DNS logs, we don't know what's in them, is there internal like S3 access, bucket access? So say I had an instance that's compromised, it's a command control bucket.
Yeah.
Would that cause us anything?
So you could see that some of that in the VPC flow logs. The rest of it you'd have to do from the EC2 instance. So you have direct access to the EC2 instance to look at the queries it's making. But we don't yet expose the DNS logs in the VPC.
Could GuardDuty catch something like that? Like,
I don't know what their plans on that, to be honest, are. I imagine we will. I just can't say that for sure. Yeah. You just can't see the layer 7. You can see DNS query with the current. You see the important Okay, anything else before we let these gentlemen sit down and take their stickers? Okay. Yes, what was your name?
Christian.
Christian. Good to meet you. Thank you very much.
David.
David.
John.
John, thank you very much.
You can go say hi.
There we go.
GuardDuty /
Oh, you can have the big one. The big one or the little one? All right. Oh, sure.
Why do you want stickers?
All right. Yeah. So it's been long enough. The attack should have occurred.
Filing it.
Let's take a look at it. Okay, so let's see if I actually should. All right, so I ran that script. In the background, it's done a few things, and now we have a few findings. Before I jump into that, I'm going to ask just a few questions, and then we'll look at the actual findings. Just make sure this all is driven home. Which 3 log sources does GuardDuty analyze? When do you need to enable each log source for GuardDuty to access it?
You don't need to.
Where can you view, monitor the GuardDuty findings?
The console.
What else? CloudWatch events. Yeah. Which 2 services does GuardDuty cover currently?
EC2 and
What general categories of attacks is GuardDuty watching for? Didn't really say this, but. Trick question. Any ideas? Yeah. All right. Before I go in there, I'm going to show my IP address. So at reInvent, who went to reInvent? Cool. So I did a couple demos at the security booth over at the MGM, and I turned on a Windows instance and a Linux instance, exposed them to the internet, and literally 15 minutes or so after that, I started getting brute force attacked. So this is the finding in the console. You get a lot of information here. You can see at the top, you sort of get a summary. You get the source IP address making the attack. Is performing an RDP brute force attack against. You get the instance ID, that's other information. You can scroll down, you see here, you get the region, the account ID. Account ID is important if you're doing a member-master account relationship. You can see the port, of course it's 3389. Then you can see where it came from. Big surprise. Petersburg Internet Network, source IP, their source port. Let's say you wanted to pull this out. I can select the finding, export it, and I get this nice JSON. This is pretty similar to what gets sent to CloudWatch events. So you can get very granular in your CloudWatch events in what you're looking for. So if you wanted to just create a rule for a particular finding, you could use one of these settings to pull that out pretty easily.
Is that the stream that gets sent to SNS?
That's what gets sent to CloudWatch events. And then you can send that to SNS or any other trigger in CloudWatch events. But we'll look at that in a second.
What type of threat do you guys have?
Is there a what?
Is there a typical threat you guys get, or are they all varying?
It depends. If you expose an EC2 instance to the internet, you're going to get a lot of port scans. If it's an interesting port, like 22 or 3389, you're going to get a lot of brute force attacks. Those are probably the most common for the ones coming from the internet.
You guys get
Warned?
warned.
Yeah, so if it detects that, let's say there's a Trojan that got installed on an EC2 instance, it would detect, and depending on the activity that was generated, it could report on something like that.
What happens when you zoom in to that IP?
Oh, so all that is a filter, basically filters on that particular thing. And you can save filters and kind of have these filters for basically particular types of attacks you're watching for. Here's another brute force attack. Came from, strangely enough,
China.
China. Oh, hold on. Didn't go farther down enough. Here we go. This came from Princeton. So this is a RDP brute force attack from the Verizon Files business network.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So given at least fair geolocation on this, or at least ISP, does Amazon make any attempt to contact the ISP and be like, listen, you got 1,000 compromised hosts on this one subnet?
Yeah.
Or just like, yeah, just let it go?
So we have a team called AWS Abuse. We also have EC2 Security. They are watching for particular types of activity. They're mainly watching for inbound attacks, and then us as AWS customers attacking other external sources. A lot of these reports come in as complaints from an external source complaining to AWS about your particular IP address, saying your IP address on the AWS network has been doing port scans against us. We have in every service a number of protections. It's called AWS Shield. You heard of that? Shield is really just our explanation of something we've always done, where we protect a number of different services in different ways from DDoS attacks. So depending on the type of attack, and it really depends on the type of attack, we will inform the customer. But there's a limit to what we can do.
Well, you inform the ISP doing the attack, is what I'm getting at.
Describe your scenario. Describe your scenario one more time.
Okay, so I am Amazon aggregate, and I see that across all these, these EC2 instances I'm watching, I notice that, let's say, a very small subnet coming from one ISP is generating millions and millions of brute force attacks. As Amazon, I can defend my customers, which is my only fiduciary responsibility, or I can let the ISP know, and whatever mechanism, be it B2B or pick up the phone.
Sure. So one thing you have to
That's more
understand
of the
is
social
we
responsibility.
have millions of customers, and we are getting attacked every day. And so there's only so much we can take on, and so it needs to hit a certain threshold. So if that particular brute force attack or whatever reached a threshold that hits our DDoS scanners and directs the traffic to what's called our black box devices, in that case, we probably would inform the customer. We have automated mitigations that come into play when an attack hits a certain threshold, and we would get involved in that case. Sometimes it depends on, so we have enterprise support. Who here is under enterprise support? And you talk to your TAM. So in that case, you get a little bit more attention because your TAM's constantly watching for that. But again, there's just a limit to what we can watch and what we can report on. So it needs to hit certain thresholds. But we are getting better at being able to do that at better scales. Yeah. I can't say if that particular case we would inform the customer though, or reach out to the ISP. To be honest.
The customer, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the.
Yeah, I don't know if we would in that case. Is there a question? Okay. So here was someone in the Netherlands doing a port scan against me, port 3389. And you can see the IP address, Netherlands, world stream. So then I, later on, a couple days later, decided to do an outbound port scan against them using Nmap. You can see the ports that I scanned, the address, Netherlands. I thought that was pretty safe because this is actually on one of the threat lists. You can see this is coming from the proof point threat list. So this is an instance on the internet making a port scan against my machine, and they're on the proof point threat list. So I thought this was pretty safe to do. But this is a reminder of while you play around with GuardDuty, you've got to be careful. I did an Nmap against them, and I got reported to by AWS Abuse, at the AWS Abuse email. I had to explain myself. There was a bit of back and forth. I've done that a lot in the last couple of months, so they've gotten used to me. think they're starting to ignore me more. But be careful when you do your tests. I'm going to give you some pointers on doing some safe tests that won't get you in trouble, but be careful. For example, internally, if we do a connection using